Welcome to late-night horror stories and true crime. The place where nightmares aren't just imagined. They're documented. Tonight, we journey far north, to the edge of civilization, into a frozen frontier soaked in silence, mystery, and fear. This story is based on real events, FBI files, missing persons, unanswered questions, a quiet Alaskan town called Nome, where too many people simply vanished without a trace. Now, some of you out there might be familiar with a certain alien species, often mentioned in abduction stories. The ones with the large black eyes, grey skin, and spindly limbs. The Greys. But this isn't their story. These aren't the Greys. These are worse, sinister, silent, and patient. They come quietly. They stand in the woods. Watch from your windows. Wait in the dark until the field is ready. This is the story of Nome, Alaska, and the harvest that followed. This is the Blacks. There is something unnerving about Nome. Tucked along the western coast of Alaska, Nome is a place few outsiders think about, unless someone they love has gone missing there. With a population of just under 4,000 and winters that regularly plunge to 40 below, it's both breathtaking and brutal. The town clings to the edge of the Bering Sea, surrounded by permafrost and a horizon that rarely ends. And for years, Nome has been losing people, not to illness, not to war, not even to the cold. They simply vanish. Between 1960 and 2004, dozens of men and women, natives and newcomers alike, were reported missing in or around Nome. Hunters who left for a short trip and never returned. Children who disappeared, walking between homes. Tourists who were last seen checking into local motels and never seen again. Some were eventually found. Most were not. The FBI investigated. Local law enforcement filed reports. The official explanation, repeated again and again, was the same. Alcohol, cold exposure, and tragic accidents. No patterns, no foul play. Just poor choices in a harsh landscape. But the people who live there, those who grew up hearing the whispers, tell a different story. They say something else lives in the dark. Case file. Peter McLeod. Peter McLeod was a bush pilot, 42 years old, ex-military, a creature of routine. Friends described him as sharp, dependable, and deeply paranoid about safety. He checked his plane 3 times before every takeoff. He lived alone in a cabin just south of Nome, close to the edge of the tree line where the forest began to thicken into shadow. He disappeared a week before Thanksgiving. The last call he made was to a friend on a scratchy landline connection. He sounded agitated. "I keep hearing this buzzing," he said. "Like a wasp's nest, but heavier. It's vibrating my windows, and I think something's watching me from the tree line." When troopers arrived 2 days later, they found his front door open. The wood stove was still warm. A kettle sat on the counter, half full. His boots were by the door. His hunting rifle was loaded and untouched, resting beside his armchair. What was missing? Peter and his voice recorder. His nephew, a radio technician, found the recorder behind the cabin. It was half buried in the snow, the outer casing cracked. The tape inside was mostly static, but toward the end, a strained voice breaks through. "They're in the trees, not animals, not people, big black things. Their eyes." The recording ends with a metallic screech. The FBI later confiscated the tape. It was never entered into public record. The 911 call, Clara Jorgensen, was a widow who lived alone on the outskirts of town. 73 years old. Quiet, devout, and unshakably practical. She made a call to 911 on January 22, 2000 at 3:17 a.m. "There's something on my roof," she whispered. "What kind of something, ma'am?" the dispatcher asked. "I don't know. It's walking, not heavy, not boots, like nails clicking." "Could be an animal. Do you see anything?" "It just looked in the window. It saw me." The line went silent. Officers arrived 26 minutes later. The doors were locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry, no broken glass, no damage. Her dinner was still on the stove. Her bedroom light was on. Clara was gone. The most chilling detail was found by the window she had mentioned. Imprinted in the hardwood floor were 4 long, narrow footprints, each ending in a claw-like indentation. The wood was blackened beneath them, as if scorched from the inside out. There were no tracks in the snow, patterns in the missing. By 2003, it was no longer possible to ignore the pattern. Most disappearances occurred between October and February, when the sun barely rose. Victims often reported feeling watched or described strange buzzing sounds in the days leading up to their vanishing. Some mentioned sleep disturbances, vivid nightmares, or waking up with burn-like markings on their necks or arms, shallow circular wounds that never seemed to scab. There were no consistent links between the victims, men and women, young and old, native and white, tourists and locals, but they were all taken near Nome, most within 20 miles of town. And they were all taken quietly. There was the incident at the Littlefeather home. Danica Littlefeather was 23, a waitress at the Polar Cafe. She lived with her older sister in a rental duplex behind the elementary school. In early December 2003, she began telling friends she was waking up in the night and seeing shadows that weren't hers moving across the ceiling. She assumed it was stress or sleep paralysis. But on December 19th, things escalated. That night, Danica awoke in complete darkness. She tried to scream, but couldn't. Her body was rigid, frozen in place. Only her eyes moved, and then she saw it. At the foot of her bed stood a figure, tall, motionless, blacker than the shadows around it. It wasn't shaped like a man. It had too many joints. Its arms were too long, and its head was oval, almost featureless, except for the eyes. 2 white lights burned where a face should be, not glowing but piercing, as if the eyes weren't casting light, but stealing it from everything around them. Danica's sister found her an hour later, curled up in the hallway, drenched in sweat and unable to speak. For weeks, Danica didn't leave the house. She drew pictures in crayon, dozens of them, the same shape over and over. Not the typical grey alien. These were longer, leaner, and far more terrifying. That week, 3 people went missing. One of them lived in the building next door. There are things the mind refuses to remember. Not out of weakness, but self-preservation. Trauma reshapes memory, bends it, buries it, especially when the truth is too devastating to face. In Nome, Alaska, this became the central question in a string of cases that reached their peak during the winter of 2004. What were these people trying to forget? There was the therapist. Her name was Dr. Helen Adair, a clinical psychologist based in Fairbanks. She had a reputation for discretion and unorthodox methods, particularly her work with regression hypnosis. In early January 2004, she was contacted by the Nome Police Department and quietly flown in. There had been 6 missing persons cases in less than 10 weeks, and the department was desperate. One man had been found wandering barefoot outside of town, speaking in gibberish. Another was arrested after trying to dig a hole in the middle of Front Street, screaming that they buried it beneath the ice. Neither could explain what had happened to them. Helen met privately with each subject over a series of nights. No recordings were allowed. The Nome police chief at the time, Owen Sturgill, kept a handwritten journal of what he witnessed during the sessions. Years later, that journal would be found in a cardboard box inside his son's garage. What follows are selections from those entries. January 17, 2004, Session 1. Subject: male, 38. Missing for 4 days before turning up outside of Kotzebue. When she put him under, he started to cry. Then he laughed. Then he screamed. I've never heard anything like it, said he was floating. Described a buzzing sound in his skull, kept repeating the word hatch over and over. Then he started speaking in a language I've never heard. Sounded like static through broken glass. She tried to wake him up, but he didn't come out of it for 6 minutes. When he did, his nose was bleeding. Helen ended the session early. She looked disturbed. January 19th, 2004. Session 3. Subject: female, 27. Reported lost time and recurring nightmares. When the lights were off, she described being in a room with no corners. Said the walls pulsed. She floated upward and something held her still. Said it wasn't hands. More like pressure, like the air had fingers. Then she said she saw one of them, a black shape with glowing eyes. She said it opened her head like a jar and looked inside. That's how she phrased it. It opened my head and looked inside. Her heart rate spiked. Helen had to wake her before she passed out. January 21st, 2004. Session 5. This one wasn't scheduled. A man from Teller, a small Inupiat village near Nome, showed up unannounced, holding a Bible and muttering about the Dark Ones. He had a long scar across his chest, half healed. Said it wasn't there before. During hypnosis, he didn't speak. He screamed. A long, wet scream that turned into an inhuman shriek. He then collapsed and seized violently for 20 seconds. Helen called off the session, saying she needed rest. She didn't sleep that night. Against protocol, Helen began recording the sessions in secret. She kept the cassette player in her coat pocket and hid the tapes inside a hollowed-out psychology textbook in her hotel room. Only 3 of the tapes were recovered later. The rest were never found. On the first surviving tape, a woman's voice can be heard under hypnosis. She speaks calmly at first, but then her tone drops. There's no sound. But they're here. I can't see them. But they can see me. I'm not in my body anymore. I'm floating. One just looked at me. Its eyes burn like lights. It's moving wrong. Like it's underwater. Like a spider with too many arms. It's inside my mind. It's in here with me. There's a moment of static. Then she starts laughing hysterically, screaming the phrase, "The black ones came first. The black ones came first." 4 days after her final recorded session, Helen disappeared. She left her hotel room at 7:22 a.m. She was seen walking down River Street by a bakery worker. No coat, no bag. She was never seen again. When local police searched her room, the tapes were gone. Her journal was shredded in the waste bin. Her notes, computer, and files, all missing. Later that week, 2 men in black overcoats arrived in Nome. They identified themselves as federal observers. They met with the police chief for 5 hours behind closed doors. When they left, The hypnosis case was closed. Permanently. A week later, a fisherman named Isaac Stone stumbled into town, barefoot and shaking. He had been missing for nearly 3 months. His fingers were frostbitten to the bone. His lips were cracked. But what disturbed everyone most was his eyes. They were solid black, no sclera, no iris, just 2 perfect onyx stones, glossy and unblinking. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. He didn't seem human anymore. They sedated him and sent him to Anchorage General. He died en route. The cause of death was listed as respiratory failure. But the coroner wrote something strange in his notes. Subject's lungs were filled with an unknown black fluid, odorless, viscous, almost like oil. The body was claimed by federal agents the next morning. What was left behind? Nome returned to quiet, a brutal, heavy quiet. Locals stopped speaking openly about the sessions. The patients who remained either fled the region or were later institutionalized. The chief resigned. The hypnosis tapes were buried in red tape and conflicting reports. Helen Adair's family never received a full account of what happened to her. But in the basement of the police station, someone forgot one thing: a tape recorder. Unlabeled, hidden behind a shelf of old case files. On that final tape is a recording made not during a session, but after. Helen's voice is shaky, whispering. They're not inside ships, the ships are inside them. We thought they were visitors, explorers, but they're not. They're harvesters. They don't care if we see them. They only care that we don't remember. On February 2nd, 2004, at 11:13 p.m., a 911 call was placed from a landline outside a fishing cabin 10 miles north of Nome. The caller, a 16-year-old named Tanner Grove, was incoherent at first, panicked. He kept repeating the phrase, "It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a dream." When authorities arrived, they found him alone, cold, covered in cuts and bruises. His friend Levi Cross was missing. What happened that night was officially ruled a traumatic disorientation episode. But what Tanner later described, once the sedatives wore off, painted a very different picture. Tanner and Levi weren't troublemakers. They were regular small-town boys, fishing on weekends, racing old snowmobiles, sneaking beers when their parents weren't looking. That night, they'd been trying to film the Northern Lights, a weak green band that had been flickering across the sky for the past hour. Levi had just bought a handheld camcorder and was itching to use it. They took off around 10 p.m., bundled in layers, carrying an old flashlight, a thermos of coffee, and Levi's camera. The trail they followed led deep into the woods, toward an abandoned ranger cabin. Snow crunched beneath their boots. Branches groaned in the wind. Then they saw it, through the trees. A light. At first they thought it was a fire, but there was no smoke, no flicker, just a steady pulse of pale white light. As they crept closer, it became clear. The light was coming from a shape nestled in the snow-covered clearing behind the cabin. It looked like an egg, Tanner would later say. Tall, smooth, like metal but not metal, not shiny. More like, yes, wet stone. It stood about 12 feet high, completely silent, half buried in the snow. The surface was textured with symbols, grooves etched into its skin, some glowing faintly like veins. There were no windows, no doors, no visible seams. They circled it slowly. Levi kept filming, whispering into the mic. "What the hell is it? This isn't a satellite, right?" Tanner reached out. The moment his glove brushed the surface, the air changed. The buzzing began, soft at first, then rising in pitch until it settled into a constant vibration that made their teeth hurt. The ground under their boots began to tremble. That's when Levi pointed at the tree line and whispered, "Tanner. Look, the thing in the trees." It was hard to see at first, a tall, slender shape nearly blending with the shadows, black from head to toe. Not from clothing, its skin was black, absorbing the moonlight, pulsing like breathing flesh. It stood on two legs, but they were too long, jointed the wrong way. And its head was oval, almost featureless, except for the eyes. Two white lights burned where a face should be, not glowing but piercing, as if the eyes weren't casting light but stealing it from everything around them. "It was upside down," Tanner whispered later, "hanging from the trees like a bat just watching us. Then it moved, silently, effortlessly. The creature dropped from the branch without a sound and landed in the snow. It didn't make a footprint, it stood still, tilting its head as if deciding. Levi ran. Tanner froze for a moment. Then he turned and sprinted after his friend. The woods blurred around him. The flashlight beam shook wildly. Behind them, the buzzing grew louder. Branches broke. Something was moving fast, not crashing through the woods, but gliding. The noise wasn't footsteps. It was more like friction, like air being torn open. Then came a scream. Levi. Tanner stopped, turned, and saw the flashlight tumbling end over end through the dark. Then silence. He called out, voice cracking. No answer. Tanner ran until he found the cabin. He locked the door, pushed a table against it, and huddled in the corner. The buzzing didn't follow. Everything fell dead quiet, not even wind. He stayed that way for nearly an hour. When he finally emerged, the clearing was empty. The strange craft was gone. No footprints, no burn marks, no heat signatures, nothing. Only the camcorder remained, half buried in the snow, its lens cracked, still recording. Levi was never found. The footage on Levi's camera was later reviewed by police and confiscated by federal agents. Only a few details were leaked. The last frame of usable video showed Levi pointing the camera at the object while whispering, "I don't think it landed. I think it grew." Then the camera jerks violently. A dark shape fills the lens. One white eye, just one, comes into focus. Then static. Tanner's story never changed. Despite multiple interrogations, therapy sessions, and sedatives, he never deviated from what he'd seen. He refused to say Levi had died. They didn't kill him, they took him. When asked what he meant, Tanner's voice dropped to a whisper. They don't crash. They don't land. They plant themselves. They bloom. And when they're ready, they harvest. The government knew. Not everything. Not where they came from, not what they wanted, but they knew something was here, and they knew it wasn't human. For over 30 years, a classified investigative file labeled Gnome Protocols was passed between obscure offices in Anchorage, Juneau, and DC. Like a cursed relic, no one wanted to hold on to it for long. It wasn't officially acknowledged. It never made it into any federal database. But among the few agents who had worked rural Alaska, the name was spoken quietly. Because once you read the file, you saw the pattern. And the pattern didn't lie. His name was Thomas McCready. He retired from the FBI in 2007 after nearly 2 decades in the Anchorage field office. For most of his career, he investigated drug trafficking and pipeline sabotage. But in 2001, he was assigned something else, a reassessment of cold case disappearances in Nome and its surrounding villages. An internal review. something for the archives. What he found haunted him for the rest of his life. In 2021, he gave a single anonymous interview to an Alaskan paranormal podcast. He refused to appear on camera. His voice was distorted, but his story was unforgettable. They weren't just missing, they were selected. That's the word I kept writing in the margins. Selected. There were things we weren't supposed to ask about. Families we couldn't talk to. Files that were redacted before they even arrived. I got one memo that said, "Do not attempt recovery. Observe only." That's when I knew it wasn't just a law enforcement thing. Something bigger was involved. Within the Gnome, protocols were fragments of another program, something called Project Ravenglass. No details, just references, incident codes and timestamps, all connected to Nome. Each reference corresponded to events that were later erased from public record. A police station blackout in 1983 during an unreported meteorological anomaly. A small charter flight in 1986 that never arrived, and whose pilot radioed a mayday, claiming to be chased by lights. A weather balloon launch in 1992 that recorded electromagnetic fluctuations, followed by the appearance of inorganic silhouettes in the sky. This phrasing repeated throughout several internal reports. The implication was clear. They weren't just appearing in Nome. They had been here, growing roots. One agent, a linguist named Dale Whitehorse, was brought in after a 2003 case involving a recovered victim who spoke an unknown language under hypnosis. He analyzed hours of tapes. According to Whitehorse, the language wasn't built around syntax. It was vibrational, as if the vocal cords weren't meant to form words, but to broadcast frequencies. He dubbed it the static tongue. Some of the sounds had patterns that mirrored deep-sea sonar pings and military radar interference. Others resembled bioelectric pulses, recorded from certain species of deep-water cephalopods. Creatures evolved in complete darkness. There was one sequence that appeared repeatedly, SAA Thor ULMEN. Rough translation, the harvest begins. In March 1998, a small team of 4 FBI agents and 1 NOAA researcher were sent to monitor a weather anomaly near a region called Devil's Bluff, a stretch of forest near Nome where compasses often failed. Only one agent returned. She arrived at the base in shock, bleeding from her scalp, eyes glassy and unfocused. Her name was Elena Briggs. She was 29 years old and had served 3 tours in the Gulf War. She refused to speak for 6 months. When she finally did, all she said was, "It was inside the air." It didn't move. It breathed. And when it opened its eyes, we all forgot why we were there. She was later institutionalized. Her official report was never filed. Another buried section of the Gnome protocols involved the returnees, individuals who vanished and were later recovered, alive but changed. Across 13 confirmed cases, investigators documented the following: complete loss of time, perception. Victims believed only minutes had passed. Total emotional detachment. No sense of fear, joy, or recognition. Blackened sclera. In 2 cases, entire eyes turned black. In others, pupils dilated to unnatural levels. Static interference. Microphones placed near the victims picked up high-frequency clicking and distorted radio signals, even when the devices weren't transmitting. One man, a high school teacher who had gone missing for 6 days, returned to his family and spoke only a single sentence: "The field is ready." He then collapsed and died. His lungs, like Isaac Stone's, were filled with a black tar-like fluid. that resisted all chemical analysis. Among the agents who dared to discuss it off record, a nickname formed for the unseen presence in Nome. They weren't called aliens, not officially. They were called the Black Visitors, described as formless, when observed directly. Slender, faceless, always watching from a distance, but when they chose to engage, always in the dark, they took their time. A common detail from multiple reports, victims often felt like they were being measured, not evaluated, not stalked. Measured, as if their skin, brain, and soul were just components being weighed for harvest. In 2004, after the hypnosis tapes, after the forest landing, after Levi Cross's disappearance, McCready received a final memo before he was reassigned. Nome remains active, activity pattern stabilizing, witness testimony no longer relevant, containment advised, protocol, observe, do not engage. The field is ripening. He was never given another Nome case again. February 28, 2020. Nome, Alaska. It was the coldest night of the year. A whiteout storm swept across the town, blanketing roads and muting the world in a roar of wind and ice. Visibility dropped to less than 5 feet. The airport grounded all flights. Power flickered. Most people stayed indoors, wrapped in blankets, trying not to think about the buzzing that came with the wind. They didn't know this would be the night it all ended. The last broadcast. At 9:37 p.m., a shortwave signal was picked up by amateur radio operators in 3 states and parts of British Columbia. The voice on the broadcast was quiet but clear. This is Margaret Elgin, transmitting from outside Nome. If anyone can hear this, don't sleep. Don't close your eyes. They come when the light is gone. I repeat, they come when the light is gone. They're not dreams, they're not spirits. They're farmers. And we are not the crop. We are the field. The voice cuts out. 5 minutes later, the first blackout hits Nome. Margaret was a school teacher, 57 years old, widowed, lived near the northern edge of town, close to the tree line. Her late husband had worked for the Nome, and before his death, he kept files, classified reports about the disappearances. She had inherited those files, studied them. She had come to a conclusion. The government wasn't ignoring the problem. They were waiting for something. She believed that everything in the Nome protocols pointed to a date, and that date was tonight. So she barricaded herself in the school, set up gas-powered heaters, lanterns, and her old ham radio. She gathered food, batteries, and paper maps. She warned anyone who would listen. Nobody believed her. 10:04 p.m., the first sign. The town's last operational generator fails. Houses go dark. Streetlights die. Furnaces cut out. Phones stop working. And then, the buzzing. Soft at first, low like a hive buried beneath the ice. Then louder, pulsing through walls and window panes. It shakes glass. It rattles dishes. It makes children cry. Dogs begin to howl. A few claw at their front doors until their paws bleed. Then comes the silence, deeper than snow, heavier than death. And then eyes. All across Nome they appear. At first, only shadows, standing in doorways, reflected in blackened windows. Slender things, their forms warping slightly in the blizzard, not blown by it, but moving through it as if untouched. One by one they move forward, hovering, not walking, from the sea, from the forests, from the sky. The black visitors arrive without ships, without sound, as if the night itself had peeled away to reveal their forms. Witnesses, those who lived to recount it, say they blinked and the visitors were already there. Some describe white eyes burning through the dark. Others report that their shadows arrived before their bodies. One man claims they came from beneath the snow, rising silently like ink spreading through water. 11:12 p.m. Margaret switches on her radio one last time. They're at the school, watching me through the windows. I think they're waiting. I'm not afraid anymore. I think we were never meant to remember them. But I do now. I remember the shape, the sound, the feeling. They hum in your spine. They bloom in the corners of your eyes. If you're hearing this, stay out of the dark. Don't listen to the static. Don't go near the trees. They don't take you. They hollow you. She pauses. They're coming inside. Transmission ends. The next morning, the sun rises over Nome. Clouds part. The storm lifts. And the town is quiet. Too quiet. Snow covers every rooftop. Smoke no longer rises from chimneys. Roads are untouched. No tire tracks, no footprints, nothing. Rescue teams from Anchorage arrive 2 days later. They find buildings intact, food in pantries, lights restored. But the people? Gone. Every single one. Not just missing, erased, no blood, no struggle, not a single body. Phones left on tables, water still running in sinks, a half-eaten meal on the teacher's desk inside the school. The only movement in town, a black recorder on the school floor. It clicks on. Static. Then a voice, Margaret's, but warped. The field has ripened. The harvest is complete. Years later, a new family moves into a small, snowy village 40 miles west of where Nome once stood. The father is a nurse. The mother teaches online. Their children love the quiet. They ask the locals why nobody goes east. The locals just shrug and say, nothing out there but dead roads and empty sky. But on some nights, just after midnight, they hear a low buzzing. And once the youngest swears he saw someone watching from the trees, something black, with eyes like stars that had forgotten how to shine. Thank you for joining us this evening. If you enjoyed our story, hit the like button and subscribe, as we have much more in store for you. If you've made it this far, you now know the truth behind Nome, Alaska, a place where silence speaks louder than screams, and the snow hides more than footprints. Remember, these are not the Greys. They don't knock. They don't speak. They simply watch and wait until the field is ripe. This has been Late Night Horror Stories and True Crime. Sleep tight if you can.